The chilled champagne flute nearly slipped from Mason O'Connor's fingers when his eyes locked with hers across the crowded ballroom, the mysterious woman in the midnight blue dress, who stood out like a solitary star in an otherwise mundane galaxy. He had reluctantly attended his best friend's engagement party, expecting nothing more than an evening of superficial conversations and obligatory congratulations. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. "Earth to Mason," teased Daniel, his soon-to-be-married friend, nudging him playfully. "I was asking if you've met Jessica's cousin yet, but I see you've already found someone more interesting." Mason cleared his throat, embarrassed at being caught staring. "Sorry, I was just distracted, clearly," Daniel laughed. "That's Nora Spencer. She's Jessica's college roommate. Flew in from Chicago just for the engagement party. Single, brilliant, and probably too good for you." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Thanks for the vote of confidence. Just being honest, she's not impressed by money or status. Jessica told me she turned down 3 millionaires in Chicago already." "Good thing I'm worth billions, then," Mason replied with a wry smile, taking another sip of his champagne. At 34, Mason O'Connor had built one of the most successful tech security firms on the West Coast. His net worth had crossed the billion-dollar mark last year, a fact that both pleased and troubled him. Money attracted the wrong kind of people, those who saw his bank account, not the man who had spent countless sleepless nights building his company from scratch. "Go introduce yourself," Daniel suggested. "Just don't mention your company or your car collection." Mason shot his friend an annoyed look before making his way across the ballroom. The woman Nora was now alone, studying a painting on the wall with genuine interest while the rest of the guests mingled around her. "Beautiful brushwork," Mason said, stopping beside her. "The artist captured light in a way that's almost impossible." Nora turned, her eyes a deep, intelligent brown meeting his. "You know Morty's work?" "I've followed his career since his first exhibition in Rome," Mason replied honestly. "Most people just say they like the colors," she said with a small smile that transformed her entire face. "I'm Nora Spencer, Mason O'Connor." He extended his hand, feeling an unexpected jolt when she took it. "Friend of the groom." "Friend of the bride," she countered. "Jessica and I survived 4 years of college together. And you flew in from Chicago for this?" Nora tilted her head. "Jessica mentioned me," Daniel did actually. "Ah." Her smile faltered slightly. "I suppose he also told you I'm the perpetually single friend who's too picky." Mason laughed. "No, but he did suggest I avoid mentioning my car collection." A genuine laugh escaped her. "He's not wrong. Nothing makes me lose interest faster than a man who defines himself by his possessions." "Good thing I left my Aston Martin at home then," Mason joked, immediately regretting it. To his surprise, Nora didn't roll her eyes or walk away. Instead, she leaned in conspiratorially. "Can I tell you a secret? I love cars. I just hate men who think owning an expensive one is a personality." For the first time in years, Mason felt something shift inside him, a curiosity that went beyond physical attraction. "Would you like another drink? I promise not to talk about my cars." "Or my job, or my—" "Careful," she interrupted with a playful smile. "You're running out of conversation topics. I'll risk it anyway." As they moved toward the bar, Mason noticed how other men in the room followed Nora with their eyes. She was beautiful, certainly, but it was something more that drew attention, a quiet confidence that made her stand apart. "So," Nora said as the bartender handed them fresh drinks, "if we're not talking about cars or jobs, what shall we discuss?" "Books," Mason suggested. "Movies." "Whether pineapple belongs on pizza." "It absolutely does not," she replied firmly, making him laugh. "Strong stance. I respect that, even if you're completely wrong." They found a quiet corner away from the crowd, and to Mason's astonishment, 3 hours passed in what felt like minutes. He learned that Nora was a pediatric surgeon, that she loved classic films and hated reality TV, that she had a weakness for cheesy sci-fi novels, and collected vintage vinyl records. Not once did she ask what he did for a living or where he lived. Not once did he feel like he was being evaluated for his wealth rather than his words. It was refreshing. "I should probably check on Jessica," Nora said eventually, glancing at her watch. "She'll think I've abandoned her at her own engagement party." Mason nodded, surprised by his reluctance to end their conversation. "Can I see you tomorrow, before you fly back to Chicago?" Something flickered across her face, hesitation, perhaps. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because I live in Chicago, you live here, and long-distance relationships are a recipe for disappointment." Mason raised an eyebrow. "I only suggested coffee, not a relationship." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Right, sorry for jumping ahead." "Although," he continued, emboldened by the champagne and the undeniable connection between them, "I wouldn't be opposed to the idea." Nora studied him for a moment, then pulled a business card from her small clutch. "Coffee. Tomorrow at 10. Text me where to meet you." Before he could respond, she was walking away, the midnight blue dress shimmering under the chandeliers. Mason stared at the card in his hand. Dr. Nora Spencer, pediatric surgery. No personal phone number, just her office contact. He smiled to himself. She wasn't making this easy for him. "You look pleased with yourself," Daniel said, appearing beside him. "I take it you two hit it off. We're having coffee tomorrow." "Coffee," Daniel repeated incredulously. "Mason O'Connor, billionaire tech genius, is having coffee, not flying her to Paris for dinner on your private jet." Mason pocketed the card. "She doesn't know about any of that, and I'd prefer to keep it that way for now." His friend's expression softened. "You really like her?" It wasn't a question, but Mason answered anyway. "I do." "Good luck," Daniel said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You'll need it." The next morning, Mason deliberately chose a small, unassuming cafe for their coffee date. He arrived early, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, a far cry from his usual tailored suits. Nora arrived precisely at 10, wearing a casual sundress that made her look younger and somehow even more beautiful than she had in her formal attire the night before. "You clean up nicely in daylight," she said as she sat across from him. "As do you," he replied, pushing a cup toward her. "I took the liberty of ordering. Almond milk latte with an extra shot, right?" She looked surprised. "Good memory." "I pay attention to things that matter." Their conversation flowed as easily as it had the night before. Mason found himself talking about his childhood, his parents' divorce, his struggles in college, things he rarely shared with anyone. Nora spoke of her work, the children she treated, her dream of opening a clinic in underserved communities. "What about you?" she asked eventually. "You've avoided talking about your work all morning." Mason hesitated. "I'm in tech security." "That's vague," she observed. "It's boring to most people. Try me." So he did, explaining the fundamentals of his work without mentioning his company's name or his position. To his delight, Nora asked intelligent questions and seemed genuinely interested. "Your flight leaves tonight?" he asked as their coffee cups emptied. She nodded. 7 p.m. "Have dinner with me before you go." Nora hesitated. "Mason, I've enjoyed this more than I expected to, honestly. But I'm not sure where this could go. We live in different cities, have different lives." "One dinner," he persisted. "Then, if you still think it's impossible, I'll respect that." After a moment, she nodded. "One dinner." They spent the day wandering through the city, visiting a small art gallery, walking along the waterfront, talking as if they'd known each other for years rather than hours. For dinner, Mason chose another modest restaurant, though it took considerable restraint not to take her to one of the exclusive places where he was well known. They shared dishes, laughed over wine, and as the evening progressed, the inevitable topic of her departure loomed larger. "I wish you weren't leaving," Mason said finally as they stood outside the restaurant. "I have surgeries scheduled tomorrow," she replied softly. "Children waiting for me." "I understand." And he did, which surprised him. In his world, people rearranged their lives for him, not the other way around, but Nora's dedication to her work only made him admire her more. "I had a wonderful time," she said, looking up at him with those thoughtful brown eyes. "Can I drive you to the airport?" She shook her head. I already called a car, but thank you. Mason stepped closer, drawn by an irresistible force. Nora. She met him halfway, her lips soft against his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally pulled apart, Nora's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if she was savoring the sensation. I should go, she whispered. Or you could stay, he suggested, knowing it was futile. A sad smile curved her lips. I can't. Mason watched her climb into the waiting car, a strange emptiness settling in his chest as it drove away. He had her number now, but he knew better than to expect much. She had a life in Chicago, he had responsibilities here. One perfect day wasn't enough to bridge that gap. But as he walked back to his car, his phone buzzed with a message. Thank you for making me miss my flight a little less. Nora. Mason smiled and typed back. When can I see you again? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally. I don't know if that's realistic. Let me worry about realistic, he replied. Just tell me when. This time the pause was longer. I have a weekend off in 3 weeks. I'll be in Chicago in 3 weeks. The next 3 weeks were the longest of Mason's life. They texted daily, had long phone conversations at night, even tried video calls when their schedules allowed. Mason found himself sharing more with Nora than he had with anyone in years, but he still hadn't told her the full truth about himself. When he finally flew to Chicago, he took his company's jet, but instructed his assistant to book him a normal hotel room, not the penthouse suite he usually occupied. He wanted this weekend to be about them, not his wealth or status. Nora met him at her restaurant near the lake, looking breathtaking in a simple green dress. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. You're really here, she said as he hugged her. I am. He breathed in her scent, realizing how much he'd missed her presence. And I plan to make the most of every minute. The weekend was perfect. They explored Chicago together, with Nora showing him her favorite places, far from the tourist attractions. They ate at hole-in-the-wall restaurants, walked through quiet neighborhoods, and talked for hours in her cozy apartment, which was filled with books, plants, and medical journals. By Sunday evening, Mason knew he was in trouble. This wasn't just attraction or infatuation, he was falling in love with Nora Spencer. And judging by the way she looked at him, the feeling might be mutual. I don't want to leave tomorrow, he admitted as they sat on her small balcony, sharing a bottle of wine. I don't want you to, she replied softly. Mason took her hand. Then let's figure this out. I can come to Chicago more often. You could visit me. We can make this work. Nora's expression grew troubled. Mason, there's something we need to discuss. What is it? She pulled her hand away gently. I did some research after we met. I know who you are, who you really are. Mason stiffened. What do you mean? Mason O'Connor, founder and CEO of Sentinel Security Systems. Forbes listed your net worth at $1.8 billion last year. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were searching his face. Why didn't you tell me? He sighed, the familiar weight of his wealth settling between them like an unwelcome guest. Because for the first time in years, someone was interested in me, not what I could give them or do for them. You thought I would care about your money? Everyone does, eventually. Nora's expression hardened. That's not fair. You didn't give me the chance to prove otherwise. You're right, he admitted. I'm sorry, I've just been burned before. So you decided to lie to me instead. I never lied, he protested. I just omitted certain details. Like the fact that you own a private island, or that your company is revolutionizing cybersecurity. Those seem like relevant details, Mason. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Would you have treated me the same if you'd known from the beginning? Nora was quiet for a moment. I'd like to think so, but we'll never know, will we? Because you didn't trust me enough to find out. I'm telling you now, he said, reaching for her hand again. I'm telling you that I've never felt this way about anyone, that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life, and that I think I'm falling in love with you. Her eyes widened at his words, but she didn't pull away this time. Mason, I know it's fast. I know we've only spent a handful of days together, but when you know, you know. A tear slipped down her cheek. "It's not just about your money, it's about trust. Relationships need honesty." "You're right," he agreed. "Complete honesty from now on, I promise." Nora took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you too." Mason's heart sank. "What is it?" "I've been offered a position at Boston Children's Hospital. It's an incredible opportunity heading up their pediatric cardiothoracic surgery department." "Boston," Mason repeated, his mind racing. "That's much closer than Chicago," she nodded. "I haven't accepted yet. I was going to turn it down, actually." "Why would you do that?" Nora looked away. "Because I was afraid of what it might mean for us. If I moved closer, would we have real potential? Or would we discover we're better as a long-distance fantasy?" Mason gently turned her face toward his. "Let's find out. Take the job, Nora. Boston is a short flight from me. We can see each other every weekend if we want." "You make it sound so simple." "It can be," he insisted. "We're both adults who know what we want." "And what do you want, Mason O'Connor?" "You," he replied without hesitation. "However, I can have you for as long as you'll have me." The next morning, Mason's private jet waited at the airport, but he found himself reluctant to board it. Leaving Nora felt wrong, like he was walking away from something essential. "Call me when you land," she said, standing on tiptoes to kiss him. "I will." He held her close, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "Think about Boston," she nodded against his chest. "I will." 2 days later, Nora called him with news. She'd accepted the position in Boston. She would move in 2 months. "I'm proud of you," Mason told her, his heart lighter than it had been in days. "This is the right decision for your career." "And for us?" she asked tentatively. "Definitely for us." Over the next 2 months, they fell into a rhythm: phone calls every morning and night, visits whenever their schedules allowed. Mason flew to Chicago twice more, and Nora surprised him with a weekend visit of her own. When she finally saw his house for the first time, a sprawling modernist structure overlooking the ocean, her eyes widened. "This is where you live, alone?" "It's too big for one person," he admitted. "I bought it for the view, not the space." Nora walked from room to room, taking it all in. "It's beautiful, but it doesn't feel like you." "What do you mean?" She gestured around the impeccably designed living room. "It feels like a showroom. Where are your books? Your personal things?" Mason realized she was right. His home, for all its luxury, contained little of himself. "I'm not here much," he explained. "Between work and travel." "A house should be a home," Nora said gently, "not just a place to sleep." That weekend, they bought books for his empty shelves, art for his blank walls, even plants for his sterile kitchen. By Sunday evening, the house felt different, warmer, more lived in. "Better," Nora declared, surveying their work. "Now it looks like someone actually lives here." Mason pulled her close. "Someone does, and maybe someday someone else might join him." Her eyes met his, serious and thoughtful. "Let's take this one step at a time, okay? I haven't even moved to Boston yet." "Right," he agreed, trying to hide his disappointment. "One step at a time." Boston changed everything. With Nora just a short flight away, they were able to see each other nearly every weekend. Mason often worked remotely from her apartment on Fridays, and they'd explore the city together before he flew back Sunday nights. 3 months into her new position, Nora invited Mason to a hospital fundraiser. It was their first official public appearance together, and Mason found himself uncharacteristically nervous. "What if your colleagues don't like me?" he asked as he adjusted his tie in her bathroom mirror. Nora laughed. "The billionaire tech genius is worried about impressing a bunch of doctors." "Your opinion of me matters more than anyone else's," he said seriously. "I want the people in your life to approve of me." Her expression softened. "They will. Just be yourself, the real you, not the CEO version." The evening was a success. Mason charmed Nora's colleagues, made a generous anonymous donation to the hospital's new pediatric wing, and felt a surge of pride watching Nora in her element, respected, admired, clearly at the top of her field. As they danced together later that night, Mason whispered in her ear, "I love you, Nora Spencer." She pulled back slightly to look at him, her eyes shining. "I love you too." It was the first time either of them had said the words aloud, though they'd been implied for weeks. "Move in with me," Mason said impulsively. Nora blinked. "What? Not right away," he backtracked. "When your lease is up, we could find a place halfway between Boston and my office, or I could open an East Coast branch," or she silenced him with a kiss. "You're getting ahead of yourself again." "Is that a no?" "It's a let's talk about this when we're not at my workplace function," she replied with a gentle smile. Later that night, in the quiet of her apartment, they did talk about it. Nora was hesitant. She'd just established herself in Boston, was building a reputation at one of the best children's hospitals in the country. "I don't want to uproot everything again so soon," she explained, "and I don't want to commute 3 hours each way. What if I move to Boston?" Mason suggested, "I can work from anywhere." She looked surprised. "You would do that? Leave your home, your headquarters, for you?" Yes, he meant it. His company was established enough that he could delegate more, work remotely, fly back when necessary. Home is where you are, Nora. 2 weeks later, Mason listed his oceanfront property and began looking at houses in Boston. Nora protested at first, insisting he was making too big a sacrifice, but Mason was certain. "My company will be fine," he assured her, "and I'll still fly back for important meetings. But the rest of the time, I want to be with you." They found a beautiful brownstone in Beacon Hill, close enough to the hospital for Nora's early morning surgeries, with a home office for Mason's video conferences. It was smaller than his previous house, but felt more like a home from the moment they stepped inside. "This is the one," Nora said, standing in the sun-drenched living room. "I can see us here." "So can I," Mason agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind, "for a very long time." They moved in together 6 months after meeting at Daniel and Jessica's engagement party. The timing felt right, fast enough to reflect their certainty about each other, but slow enough to be thoughtful. Mason continued to run his company successfully from Boston, flying back for quarterly board meetings and major client pitches. Nora's career flourished at the hospital, where she was already making a name for herself with innovative surgical techniques. They settled into a rhythm together, Nora's early mornings balanced by Mason's late nights, her hospital emergencies accommodated by his flexible schedule. They fought occasionally, usually about small things: Mason's tendency to work through dinner, Nora's reluctance to delegate even minor tasks, but they always found their way back to each other. 1 year after they met, Mason took Nora back to the city where they'd first connected, ostensibly to attend Daniel and Jessica's first anniversary party. "We should visit that cafe where we had our first date," Mason suggested as they walked through the familiar streets. Nora smiled. "It wasn't a date, it was coffee." "It was definitely a date," he insisted. "I was nervous the entire time." "You didn't seem nervous. I'm good at hiding it." The cafe looked exactly as it had a year ago: small, unassuming, with mismatched furniture and excellent coffee. They sat at the same table by the window, ordering the same drinks. "Does it feel strange to be back here?" Mason asked, watching Nora's face. "A little," she admitted. "So much has changed since then." "For the better." She reached across the table to take his hand. "Definitely for the better." After coffee, Mason suggested a walk along the waterfront, another echo of their first day together. As they reached a quiet spot overlooking the harbor, he stopped and turned to face her. "Nora," he began, his heart racing, "this past year has been the happiest of my life." She smiled. "Mine too. Before I met you, I had everything I thought I wanted: success, wealth, freedom, but I was missing the most important thing." He took a deep breath. "You've shown me what it means to truly share a life with someone, to put someone else's happiness on equal footing with my own." Understanding dawned in Nora's eyes as Mason reached into his pocket and dropped to one knee. "I don't want to spend another day without knowing you'll be by my side forever." He opened the small velvet box, revealing a platinum ring with a single perfect diamond. "Nora Spencer, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, momentarily unable to speak. Then, finding her voice, "Yes, yes, I will." Mason slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too," she replied, "more than I ever thought possible." They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. Daniel served as Mason's best man, Jessica as Nora's maid of honor, a fitting symmetry given how they'd brought Mason and Nora together in the first place. "Who would have thought," Daniel joked during his toast, "that my engagement party would lead to another wedding?" "Mason, you owe me big time, buddy." The newlyweds honeymooned in Italy, visiting the Rome gallery where Morty, the artist they'd discussed the night they met, was having a new exhibition. Mason surprised Nora by purchasing one of the paintings for their home, a tangible reminder of their first conversation. Back in Boston, they settled into married life with ease, each supporting the other's career while building their life together. Mason expanded his company's charitable foundation, focusing particularly on children's health initiatives, a cause dear to Nora's heart. Nora continued to pioneer new surgical techniques, saving children who might otherwise have been lost. 2 years into their marriage, they welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Lily, with Mason's dark hair and Nora's thoughtful brown eyes. Mason cut back his work hours even further, determined to be present for every milestone. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted to Nora one night as they stood watching their sleeping daughter. "A family, a real home." "Neither did I," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "I was so focused on my career I didn't leave room for anything else. Do you ever regret it?" "Taking a chance on us?" Nora turned to face him, her expression serious. "Not for a second. Some things are worth rearranging your life for." Mason smiled, thinking of the reluctant party guest he'd been 4 years earlier, dreading an evening of small talk and superficial connections. How could he have known that night would change everything? "What are you thinking about?" Nora asked, noticing his expression. "Just how lucky I am that Daniel and Jessica got engaged," he replied, pulling her close. "And that you wore that blue dress." Nora laughed softly. "Of all things to remember." "I remember everything about that night," Mason said seriously. "The moment I saw you, I knew something important was happening. I just didn't realize I was meeting my future wife." "Well," she said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him, "I'm very glad you did." As they walked hand in hand from their daughter's nursery to their bedroom, Mason reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them here, from a chance meeting at an engagement party to the rich, full life they now shared. It hadn't always been easy, bridging their different worlds, but every challenge, every compromise had been worth it. Some people spent lifetimes searching for what he and Nora had found in each other: a partnership of equals, a love built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. Mason knew with absolute certainty that he would spend the rest of his days grateful for the night he'd reluctantly attended his friend's engagement party, and found, instead of mere obligation, the love of his life waiting across a crowded room.